Governor Shapiro, thank you so much.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
So your new book, Where We Keep the Light, what does the title mean?
You know, I'm privileged every day to be able to be out in the community and see the goodness of people, whether on their farms, at their community centers, their schools. And I see a lot of light every day. I see a lot of goodness. Sadly, I think our politics and too often times the way people consume information is defined by darkness and division. I wanted to write a book about the light that I see every day, the light that I see in my daily work, the light that came upon me and my family after we were attacked in April. And I think the light that has really defined this country and put us in a position where for the last 250 years, we've been working hard to perfect our union. We've taken a few steps forward and definitely a few back. But through it all, I think if you look hard enough, you see the light and the goodness of the people of this country and certainly the people of this Commonwealth.
You opened this book talking about the arson attack on the governor's residence. How was that for your family?
First off, I appreciate you asking, how was it for my family? Because this was something sadly my family and I all experienced together. I realized some folks saw me out there as their governor, and I appreciate that, but for me, my priority in the wake of this was being a good dad and a husband. It was scary. I mean, to be woken up in the middle of the night with a bang on the door from state troopers telling you gotta get out because there's a fire, only to learn shortly after that it wasn't some accident in the kitchen, which is kind of what we assumed, but rather someone had smashed into the home and threw Molotov cocktails around and was a door away from finding us and beating me to death with a hammer as he said he wanted to do. I think for us, it has been a challenge to just sort of find that balance again and that sense of safety again. For me personally, it has been something I've had to really work through as a dad and a husband. This notion that doing the thing that I was raised to do, service, doing the thing that I love to do, serving other people, brought my family, that close to danger. And I'm still working through that, candidly, months later.
I mean, initially, you thought it was an accident, but then when you looked at the surveillance video, what did you see?
Initially, I thought it was an accident. I figured it was something in the kitchen, or I thought, we had lit candles prior to the Seder and left them on a small table that was right by the entry to the state dining room. And so I just imagined one of them had fallen over and caught fire. After my family and I escaped, like literally running out of the house as firefighters, brave firefighters were running in, after I got the fire contained, the fire chief from Harrisburg brought me into the room to see what happened. I'm by no means an expert, but it didn't look like a regular fire. And I noticed out of the corner of my eye, the table where Lori had lit candles was mostly intact. And I thought if this started the fire, maybe maybe it wouldn't look that way. That was the first inkling I had that there was something wrong. And then, of course, I was informed a few minutes later by the state police that it was a deliberate attack. It was an arson attack, and the person was there to try and kill us.
And then you see the surveillance video of him hurling the Molotov cocktail and carrying out this horrific attack.
Yeah, I mean, it was chilling to see. And, Laura and I were really purposeful about answering all our kids' questions. No parent knows how to handle a situation like this, but we felt that just being honest with them, telling them everything we knew in real time and sharing everything with them was important. But I must say, when we shared this video with them, it was very hard to watch. It was very hard, I know, for them to watch, because this is a place where we had felt safe, where we should be safe, and where our guests should be safe, and the staff who works there should be safe. So it's hard to see that. I'm grateful to the prosecutors for prosecuting this individual, be behind bars for up to 50 years. And I'm grateful for the good work of the police to not only address that situation at that moment, but to ensure our safety going forward.
I know your son, Reuben, asked if someone tried to kill your family because you were Jewish.
Yeah.
How hard was that conversation?
It was really hard. We had to have some honest, tough conversations with our kids about what political violence is all about and how it's designed to maybe target one person but affect a broader swath of people based on a particular characteristic, perhaps in this case, our faith. And look, it's a hard thing for a parent to have that conversation with their kid when they know in this business they can't necessarily guarantee that level of safety. What I really hope for every day is that kids stop having to worry about that. Not just my kids, but all people have to stop worrying that violence is going to come to their community because of something they believe or who they voted for, or how they pray, who they love.
Less than a year earlier, President Trump had nearly been assassinated while campaigning in your state.
Yeah.
How has that political violence changed now how you carry out your work?
Nora, I think political violence has gotten worse in this country since Butler. And I think it is only going to get better when all politicians, all people, condemn it universally, no matter who's the target of it and no matter who carries it out. I don't care if you're a left-wing ideology, right-wing ideology, it should not be hard for us to say that it is all wrong. I think we all need to do a better job of meeting this moment to bring down the temperature and reduce the violence that we're seeing in our communities.
And the interesting thing is, you've talked about this before, I know, with Governor Cox, a Republican. When people see a Republican and a Democrat together, working together, it actually does lower the temperature.
I think it does, right? My wife always said when we were, the kids were little and I'd be like wrestling with them on the floor or getting wild with them before bed. And she'd get mad at me for doing that. And she'd go, speed of the leader, speed of the group, right? Like, you need to calm them down so they can go to bed. And I think in many ways she's right. Speed of the leader, speed of the group. When you've got a Republican governor, a Utah Democratic governor of Pennsylvania standing up there and modeling the kind of behavior we hope to see, by the way, while still having profound policy differences on a whole host of issues. Hopefully that can bring down the temperature and at least cure some of the ills that we're seeing, get us back to a baseline that allows us to have honest disagreements about policy, work through them, and perfect our union.
A week after the arson attack on the governor's mansion, President Trump called you.
He did.
What did he say?
At first, I didn't know who was calling, and I just let the call go to voicemail. And when I realized just a couple minutes later,
He wasn't in your contacts.
He was not in my contacts. He is now, though. And I listened to the voicemail, and as I'm listening to the voicemail, Max walked into the kitchen. I was there by myself just having a cup of coffee. It was early in the morning. And Max goes, "Was that the president?"
This is
And I
your
said,
son, yeah.
Yeah, my son Max, who's now 16. And I said, "It was." He goes, "Are you going to call him back?" I said, "Of course I'm going to call him back. He's president of the United States." So I called back, and I got to tell you, Nora, I didn't think he was going to answer that line. I assumed it was not really his number. And sure enough, he answered the phone. And the first thing he wanted to do was to tell me that his team was on it and providing, whatever support we needed from a law enforcement perspective, which I know to be true. I had talked to the FBI director, talked to the Attorney General in the days before, and I appreciate what they did. And then I frankly expected the conversation to end there just a couple minutes in, and he then went on to bring up a lot of other topics.
Including a 2028 presidential contest, and he said to you, "You don't want to be president, it's too dangerous."
Well, we had had a longer conversation before that. We talked about a number of issues. I actually lobbied him on an important steelworker issue for Pennsylvania. And then he began musing aloud about political violence, his situation in Butler, what happened to me in Harrisburg. And he said, being president's a really dangerous job. And he rattled off other jobs that have a lower fatality rate than presidents. And he said, it's very, very dangerous. Just be careful. And I said, well, Mr. President, I'm not looking to run for president. And he said, well, I just wanted to share that with you. And so it was a strange conversation that bounced through a lot of different topics. But look, I appreciate the fact that he called.
But do you think about that when you consider your future, about just how dangerous it is?
Look, I'm in a job right now where I'm out in the public every day. I'm in their communities, I'm on their farms, I'm in their centers, and I really honestly just try not to think about it. I think if you become captive to the fear, then you stop showing up. You stop putting yourself in a position to be an effective leader because you can no longer listen to people. You can no longer hear them in their communities. I think part of what's allowed me to do my work well here in Pennsylvania is I'm able to get out of the office and show up and listen and take people's temperatures and learn from them and then do for them. It's what I've learned throughout my entire career, from when I first started knocking on doors, running for state representative, the importance of showing up and listening. And so I can't really live in fear. I can't think about that. I wish our political violence was reduced in this country. I'm doing everything in my power to model the kind of behavior that will hopefully reduce it. I'm partnering with others to make sure we bring down the temperature. That's what I think I can do, but I can't become captive to the fear.
Let's rewind a little bit. I know that growing up you wanted to be like your dad.
Yeah.
A pediatrician, the person everyone came to when they had a problem. So how come you didn't end up a doctor?
Oh man, because they make you take all these classes in college, all the pre-med stuff. Nora,
And you weren't very good at the science and math.
No. And I worked hard. I mean, I wasn't, screwing around. I was really studying. There was one day in college, my freshman year, where I was on the pre-med track and took an exam, big lecture hall. The professor asked me to come down and hands me back my exam. This is after class. And so I know you studied. I know you tried. That's evident. But maybe this just isn't for you. And he handed me back my exam. And out of 165 points, I got a 4, like a total of a 4 on this exam, which I didn't think was mathematically
That
possible.
means you flunked it.
I flunked that exam. And I was going to call my dad and be like, hey, Pop, I was probably being overly dramatic. I'm not going to be a doctor like you. Sorry, but I had to go to basketball practice. I was on the basketball team my freshman year. It is true, a short Jewish guy like me. I could ball back then. And that day, I literally got cut from the basketball team. So now I got cut from the basketball team, flunked out of pre-med, and I really thought like my dream of, being an NBA playing doctor was over. And that night, someone knocked on my dorm room door and said, hey, Shapiro, we've got an opening on the student government. You should run. I'm like, I don't want to do that. It was not of any interest to me. And he said, well, you got nothing better going on in your life. You should give it a shot. So I ran, I won, and I guess as they say, the rest is history. But that was a pivotal moment for me. And looking back on it, in many ways, the way I was raised to care for others, to do for others, to serve others, I thought would be a doctor like my dad. And it ended up in this business of serving others through government service. I certainly did not understand it at the time. I didn't appreciate, that moment there until many, many years later. But looking back on it, it may not be through the sciences, it may be through government, but I think I'm making my folks proud doing what they taught me, which is to serve and help others.
You say about your mom, her standards were high and her sense of duty greater.
Yeah.
What did she teach you about activism?
Man, my mom was maybe the greatest activist I've ever been around. You're growing up as a little kid, 6, 7, 8 years old. You don't know anything beyond like your neighborhood, right? Your playground, your school. And my mom taught me there was this huge world around me of people who were suffering, who were challenged, who couldn't live out their life openly, in their faith. And that there were kids around the world in a place called the Soviet Union, which I had never heard of, who couldn't go out and play like me or go to a school like I was privileged to go to, or even go to a synagogue like this one. And she taught me about the need to care about others and help others. Now, again, Nora, I don't want to suggest that I understood that as a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old boy, but I just saw someone who was just involved in everything, doing everything, community-minded, and teaching me about people that were suffering or facing hardship and making sure I understood I had a responsibility to help them in some way.
You also write that you had a happy childhood and at points an unhappy childhood home.
Yeah.
It's something you've never spoken about publicly.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I wanted to share that. In part because I know there's a lot of other families out there that go through this kind of stuff. But in part, I want my mom to know that for as difficult as our childhood was at times, for as difficult as I imagine hers was, you know, she really set me on this path of service in a way that, you know, I hope she sees some of herself in, and I hope she takes pride in. I didn't set out to do what I do to please my mother or to do something she asked me to do, but I think she's proud of what I'm doing, and I hope she sees a reflection of herself in the work I do.
And I know you haven't talked about this publicly before, but what happened? What was happening at home?
You know, I know my mom struggled a lot as a kid, and as she evolved into an adult, probably should have gotten some help, probably should have talked to someone to help her manage the challenges, the very real challenges that she faced.
Mental health challenges?
Yeah, and I think in the absence of that, you know, we had times in our home, which was a really loving home, I have to stress that, and happy. I mean, we loved one another and enjoyed being around one another. I'm as close as ever to my brother and sister today as I was then. But there were moments of chaos and yelling and things that aren't normal ways that I think kids should grow up. And I know there's other families out there that have that in their home too. And I think for me, the reaction to that was to try and comfort my siblings, protect them, seek out a solution, which for me back then was, how do I just get this to be calm and not chaotic? How do I help make sure my mom is happy and she's okay? And how do we sort of get through this particular moment? And I think, you know, sort of reflecting on it as I wrote this book, in many ways that's guided a lot of the decisions I made throughout my career and my call to service. You know, this sort of constant desire to find a solution to someone else's problem.
That's driven by childhood trauma.
I guess so, and I don't want to suggest that I grew up with trauma. I think my mom grew up with real trauma. I grew up.
But trauma is intergenerational.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's also manifests itself, particularly in my work as Attorney General, to help those who were abused, help those children who didn't get a fair shot. And you know, I'm sure this is not easy for my mom to sort of hear me talk about, but I hope she can take some pride in seeing that the people I've helped along the way, when I've had those gut check moments, do you go forward, do you push, do you launch the investigation, do you file the lawsuit, do you campaign for this office, do you support this cause? I hope she sees a lot of herself in what she taught me as a young boy about helping others in that work that I do.
I mean, these can be very painful things that happen to us when we're young and dealing with mental health issues.
Yeah.
What made you want to talk about it now?
I think as I have done this work in public service, I've always found myself being very open about helping people with mental health issues, people with trauma issues, people who've been abused. And I have felt at so many different times as I've done this work that I wanted to open up and share, you know, sort of, I get it, and I'm here for you, and I want to help you. And I never did. In part, I think because I didn't feel like all of that was my story to share. And the more I thought about it, my mom's story, I mean, the more I thought about it.
But it's your story too.
Yeah,
I think
I realized that. And I wanted to be forthright with that. And I have also.
You had therapy?
I have also, I'll answer your question in a sec. I've also found that as I've shared some of this with small groups of friends over the years, that they would then volunteer, hey, you know what, in my house we had this, or we had that challenge, or this was an issue. And so I hope that when folks read this book, they can see a little bit of their own upbringing, their own challenges, and you know, maybe see that they are surmountable, and to see the goodness. And I think my mom comes off as a hero in this book. I really do. She's a wonderful person who drove me to do the work I do, and in many ways, quite literally, obviously, but in many ways figuratively, I would not be here doing what I do but for her. You asked about therapy. I was asked that question actually after the governor's residence attack and some of the issues we worked through. I've never been to therapy, neither for the issues that I dealt with growing up, nor with what happened in the wake of the attack. But I want to be really clear. That is not because I'm against therapy. I think that is a wonderful thing for people. And there is no shame in that. There should be no stigma associated with that. I have been blessed in my life to have someone that centers me, who I can talk to about everything and anything, who when I feel that imbalance is able to, help me find clarity. And that's my wife, Lori, who's been my best friend since the 9th grade. And so I think growing up in that environment, I had Lori. As I've gone through these challenges as an adult, I've had Lori. And so in many ways, the talks that you might have with a therapist, in many ways, I've been blessed to have those with Lori. But I want to stress, I think therapy is a wonderful thing, and those who take advantage of it really have a great opportunity. And as governor, I have fought to make sure in all of our insurance, all of our insurance companies, we've got mental health parity, we've got coverage for therapy, we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in therapy for kids at school who wish to have counselors for that. I think it's a really important thing.
Mm-hmm. We're about the same age, and if not the same age. We're about the same age, and I think it's true. I don't think our parents really had access to mental health therapy.
Yeah.
Our generation, even too, I don't think utilizes it probably to the degree that they should.
Right.
But certainly the younger people, the next generation, utilizes mental health therapy a lot.
And they're super open about it.
Which is great,
It's
right?
awesome.
Right.
I show up at a school and I'll say, what's the one thing you need that I can help with? And they're not talking to me about budgets or any of that stuff. You know what they say? We need more mental health counselors. Mm-hmm. And all they want to do is talk about their feelings and be open about it. And I think that's awesome. And I think you're right. It was sort of taboo for our parents' generation. I think it was accepted in our generation, but not done a lot. And now for kids, I think it's great that they're taking advantage of this.
Mm-hmm. You describe your wife, Lori, as not just an exceptional mom, but also your best friend who you were with together since
ninth grade.
Ninth grade. What role does she play in your campaigns?
I mean, not a big role outwardly. And to be honest with you, for most of our campaigns, with 4 kids and the chaos at home, she was largely, at home raising our children. But I'd come home from a day on the trail, I'd download to her, I'd talk to her about what I experienced, I'd talk to her about what I was feeling. And what was so interesting was for someone who was home and at that moment in her life really focused on kids, she still had this keen sense of where people were and this incredible ability to help me see the truth in what they were saying, or the kernel of information that was really important for me to understand, the connection I needed to have in order to make that campaign successful or that work successful. So she's been a sounding board for all of my years doing this. She's the last person I talk to before any big decision. And as we face big decisions in our lives, one thing she has always returned me to is, why do you want to do this? How can this job, this position, help you serve others? What's the impact on our family? These are the foundational questions she would return me to every step of the way.
Oh, that's so interesting. She's pushing you to explain what your intention is and what your purpose is all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I read in the book about a moment where Senator Schumer was encouraging me really strongly and vigorously to run for the United States Senate. And that's a big deal to be a U.S. Senator. And I thought I had a pretty good shot to win that race. And I remember leaving Senator Schumer in D.C. and taking the train back home and promising him a call the next day where I'd give him an answer, yay or nay. And I walked in the house that night. It was total chaos, bath time, bedtime, the whole thing. And I didn't get a chance to settle in and talk to Lori until much later. I ran through all the politics, I ran through all the reasons for doing it, and then she looked at me deadpan and said, I'm all in, but just tell me, why do you want to do that job? And I said, look, honey, it's being a U.S. Senator, it's a big deal. No, I understand it's a big deal. Why do you want to do that job? A couple hours later, I called Senator Schumer and told him I really didn't want to do that job. I wanted to run for Attorney General, which I think most political folks would say was not the wisest decision, but for me, it was the decision that allowed me to serve others in the best way I could, to have the most direct impact on people's lives. And while some of the pundits may have said, dumb decision, U.S. Senate's a higher level position or wherever than being Attorney General, what Lori understood through that was that I was being called to serve. The best way I could serve at that moment was being AG, and the most impact I could have on people's lives was as the Attorney General. And so I take nothing away from any U.S. senators. It's wonderful that they have that job. It wasn't the right job for me, and Laura helped me see that.
You talk about your wife, too, as having this high emotional intelligence,
Yes.
EQ, which is
Yes.
very important.
Yes.
What was the advice she gave you when you were being considered to run as and be the running mate of Kamala Harris, to be her VP?
You know, it was a truncated period of time for obvious reasons. And for the first few days, you go through this vetting process. They ask you a lot of questions. They ask for a lot of documents. And, you know, there wasn't a lot of conversations she and I were having in those moments. I think she knew something was nagging at me, that it didn't feel like the right situation for me. But it wasn't until the day or so before I went to meet with the vice president that we really got into it, and not into it in any negative way, but got into a deep discussion. And in many ways, she returned to the same questions she had asked me all along. Why do you want to leave this job that you absolutely love, where you get a lot of stuff done every day, to do that? Explain that to me. We talked a lot about the impact this would have on our children, having to move our children, if we were successful, to DC and take them out of their schools, out of their community, the impact of them growing up in that environment. And so in many ways, we had the same foundational questions and conversations.
In fact, in the vetting, you say in the book that you were advised, well, your wife's going to have to get new clothes, she's going to have to pay for hair and makeup, you're going to have to move into the vice presidential, all this stuff, and it seemed like it kind of turned you off.
Look, there were a number of moments in that process where I was asked things, or in the case of what you just said, you know, I thought folks weren't particularly respectful to my wife, that left me really questioning whether this was something I wanted to do.
Was it the job or the way the people were asking it?
I think it was all of the above. On the one hand, I was deeply humbled to be asked to go through this process that very few people get to go through. I was honored, truly. I also understood the absolute need to beat Donald Trump, and I wanted to do everything in my power to help. And if being vice president was a way that could be helpful, I wanted to entertain that. I wanted to, you know, go through that process. And I think for me, it was the process in part, but also returning to the underlying question: would this be the best way I could serve? And
But that's not what you write in the book. You write, you felt like the questioning was unnecessarily contentious, and you even described one specific question by the vice president's staff, Kamala Harris's staff, as offensive.
I write both in the book, about the vetting process and about the best way I could serve. As it relates to the vetting process, I thought some of the commentary about my wife was not okay. And I thought asking me if I was a double agent for the Israeli government was offensive.
So let me be clear. While you were being vetted to be Kamala Harris's running mate, you were asked, have you ever been an agent of the Israeli government?
Yes.
And they also asked you if you were a double agent for Israel.
They actually asked if I was an agent and if I had ever spoken to an undercover, agent of the Israeli government.
And what did you say?
Well, on the first, I said, of course not. And on the second, I said, of course not. And I mean, look, I was the Attorney General. I sent people undercover on operations all the time. And, if you're doing a good job being undercover, you don't know that person is undercover. So I sort of made that point to try and lighten the mood that if they
Like,
were
how would I know if I
undercover,
was talking to
how
an
would I-
undercover agent if they were undercover?
Right,
Yeah.
literally. And again, I understand they had a job to do to ask me those questions. I think it went beyond just checking a box on a questionnaire.
Why do you think they asked you that?
I don't know. I don't want to sit here and ascribe beliefs to others. I can tell you that it landed on me in an offensive way. I have dedicated my entire adult life to serving this country in different elected capacities, different volunteer capacities. I love this country, and for someone to question that, for someone to question my loyalty, particularly as someone who is as open about his faith as he is, was offensive to me.
Do you think Kamala Harris knew that you were being asked that question?
I don't know. To this day, I don't know if the vice president knew that I was being asked that question, and I don't know if the vice president knew that I called 48 hours before she announced her decision to pull out and tell her I did not want to be considered. I don't know.
Why did you pull out?
When I returned home from the meeting, I should back up. When I went into that meeting, I had a nagging feeling that this was not the right thing for me.
This is the meeting with Kamala Harris.
Yes. And in fact, I had some aides who suggested, just don't go to me. If you're not going to do it, you should just kind of pull out right now.
Why did you already have a nagging feeling even before you went into the
Just going
meeting?
through the process, I had a nagging feeling that it wasn't the best way I could serve. It wasn't going to be right for my family. I wanted to defeat Donald Trump. I wanted to do everything in my power to help our ticket in a really, really, really difficult moment for our country. And I felt this obligation to help in some way. And so I decided it was important for me to hear from the vice president what she envisioned with the job. Because ultimately, how could I make this decision if I didn't know where her head was? And she didn't know where mine was, because ultimately she'd be the boss and she'd have to make a decision as to what was best for her. And I will tell you, we had a very, very candid conversation at the vice president's residence.
Candid conversation to me always is kind of a polite way of papering over what really happened.
Actually, I don't mean it that way.
Okay.
To this day, I am grateful to the vice president for being as blunt and direct as she was, and I think I was equally blunt and direct back. I think oftentimes in a professional setting, particularly a politically professional setting, everybody kind of stands on ceremony. Nobody really wants to say what they feel. She told me exactly how she felt, and I told her exactly how I felt. And it was polite and it was direct. And I thought we both left that meeting with a better understanding of where one another were. I left certainly with a clear understanding of what she envisioned in the role. And I think she left with an understanding of what I had hoped the role would be. And it was very direct and I thought very good conversation.
Sounds like you left and decided you don't want the job.
Well, I left and I had planned to head home and kind of do what I do when I got to make any big decision, just sit with Lori and think about it. I walked in the door and the kids were there and they just wondered what happened and what are we going to do. And Laura and I got a quiet moment to talk, and I just said, this doesn't feel right, and I don't think this is what I want to do, and I don't know that this is the best fit. I write about it extensively in the book, and I thought it was important for me to be honest with the vice president as she was preparing to make arguably the most important decision of her campaign, and let her know she should make that decision in a way that did not include me or factor me into her process. Mm-hmm. And so I picked up the phone to call.
To call her team to let her know that.
I called her team and asked if I could speak to her to express the conclusion I had reached, and they did not let me speak to her. They told me she had retired for the evening. It was in the 8 o'clock hour, which I found a little bit strange. And so I decided to relay to her aide the conclusion that I had reached and asked her to pass that along to the vice president.
You thought it was weird that her staff didn't let you talk to her to say,
Look,
maybe it's not the right fit.
I don't want to give her staff a hard time, and I don't know what the dynamics were there, but I thought it was very important to be direct, to be honest, to let them know the conclusion that I had reached in enough time for her to make a decision amongst a number of other really wonderful candidates who were being considered and vetted.
Do you think if you had been Kamala Harris's running mate, she would have won?
No, I think the people voted based on who was at the top of the ticket. And I want to stress, I did everything in my power to help in Pennsylvania. I was in Wisconsin and Michigan with Gretchen Whitmer and Tony Evers, traveled across the country wherever the campaign asked me to go, and they asked me to film an ad with the vice president, and I sat right beside her, filmed the ad. I did everything they asked, and I worked my tail off to do everything I could to help, because I viewed that election as just such a critically important juncture for this country, and I think we'd have been far better off had she won the election.
Do you think that you were not chosen as Kamala Harris's VP because you were Jewish?
Again, I called that Sunday night to say I didn't want to be considered. So I think
But you don't know that she knew that.
I think that's a question for her.
Did it bother you that perhaps your Jewish faith was a factor?
I recognize when you are making a decision to pick a running mate, you have to consider lots of different factors. You know, I chose, albeit not at the same level with the same spotlight, a running mate when I ran for governor. And I chose Austin Davis, who's a wonderful partner and our Commonwealth's first black lieutenant governor, I think our nation's youngest as well. And we went through an extensive vetting process, and it was important to me not only to know his views on the issues, but to know how we would meld together, whether we could be a team, whether he felt that I would hear him out, and whether I would feel that hearing him out would be a value added to the process. So I'd been through a process like that, and so I wasn't offended by her desire to ask me any questions or probe different issue areas. I think she was absolutely entitled to do so. I just knew that at the conclusion of that process for me, after I left Washington, D.C. that night, that it was not the best way for me to serve.
Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz was ultimately chosen as Kamala Harris's running mate. Did you know that he was asked by her vetting team if he had ever been an agent of China?
Tim and I are friends. Gwen and Lori are really good friends. We never spoke about this process, neither during it certainly or afterwards.
Governor Walz is now under investigation by Trump's Department of Justice over an alleged conspiracy to impede federal immigration agents. We've all seen what's going on in Minnesota with ICE. If that happened here in Pennsylvania, what would you do?
Well, first let me say the Department of Justice should be investigating the killing of Renee Good. The idea that they are investigating in what seems to be a very politically motivated effort, the mayor and the governor, and ignoring what that ICE agent did on the streets of Minneapolis, to me is wrong. And I think as a former attorney general, as someone who's investigated shootings, investigated political corruption, charged people, and at times didn't charge people, what I see the Department of Justice doing there causes me great concern. As for here in Pennsylvania, I can tell you that we have trust in the communities where we have policing and law enforcement. We have invested on my watch dollars to increase our police force by 2,000 people here in this Commonwealth, while at the same time investing hundreds of millions of dollars into violence prevention initiatives in our community centers, at our churches, with our community organizations that lead anti-violence efforts. And as a result of that work, crime is down 12%, fatal gun violence is down 42%, largely because we've built trust in the community. When the federal government surges troops, whether National Guard or ICE, into a community against the wishes of a mayor, against the wishes of a governor, it erodes that trust that is the bond that keeps a community and police working together to keep their streets safe. It is my hope that they would not do that here in Pennsylvania, in any of our cities or any of our towns. But I'm not leaning just on hope. We are prepared from a law enforcement perspective. We're prepared from a state perspective. We're coordinating with our local partners should that come to our doorstep.
How would you stop it?
I have shown an ability to take this administration to court and win and stop some of the negative actions that they were attempting to put in our direction, negative actions they were attempting to take against us. I've also shown an ability to be able to work closely with law enforcement to be able to keep communities safe. And so we have plans should the federal government try and surge those type of assets into our communities. And I believe if they want safe communities, as they profess to want every single day, then they should trust the way we're handling things here in the Commonwealth, where crime is down, where communities trust the police and the police work with the communities, and we're seeing better and better things happen in our communities because of that trust.
What do you think President Trump's ultimate goal is in sending ICE into Minnesota, putting troops from the Pentagon on standby? What's this about?
He claims that he wants safer communities. Well, I think to build safe communities, you need to build trust between the law enforcement and the communities that they police. We've done that here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, invested in policing. We've hired 2,000 more police and investing in community violence initiatives that have reduced violent crime by 12% in our Commonwealth, fatal gun violence by 42% in our Commonwealth. That's the way you keep communities safe, by having trust between law enforcement and the community they represent. What the president is doing in Minneapolis is ripping away those bonds between the community and the police, eroding that trust and making people less safe. And that is incredibly dangerous. I think it is bad for our society.
Why do you think he's doing it?
The president claims it's all about safety.
What do you think it's about?
I think what the president's trying to do is show that he can be the dominant figure, that he can dictate behavior, whether we're talking about Minneapolis or Greenland or Venezuela. This president wants to try and show what he believes to be strength that I think is a facade of strength, and ultimately a veneer of strength. And ultimately what he's doing is making people worse off, less safe.
I mean, I've covered politics for 25 years. You and I knew each other since days on Capitol Hill when you were a staffer and I was a cub reporter.
Roll call, yeah.
Does the Democratic Party have a clear set of ideals?
I think the Democratic Party has a lot of clear ideals and wonderful values. Otherwise, I wouldn't be a member of this party.
But are they articulating it in a way, in a national message that will win elections?
Yeah, I think folks are hoping that there will be one person every day who's going to go out and be the alternative to Donald Trump or be the voice of the Democratic Party. And that one person certainly does not exist right now. And that's okay, because there are wonderful Democrats who are governors, who are mayors, who are members of Congress, who are doing really good work every single day. And that work they're doing, I think, is helping shape and define the new generation of the Democratic Party. And I think it is important that our party go through this process right now, this process of trying to figure out what are going to be those core values that we fight for that define our party going forward. Because in many ways, we've been robbed of that as a party for many, many years. You could make an argument that we haven't sort of had an ideological battle within our party since the Clinton election way back in 1992. And so I think it is important that we go through this process. I think it's important that we be a party with a Big Ten. I think it's important that we be a party that has lots of different views and different issues that might define someone who leads in one state versus someone who leads in another state. The key is going to be how to pull all that together around a shared vision.
What do you think that contest in 2028 looks like?
I think it's hard to think about the contest in 2028 when we have, I think, an existential challenge before us in 2026 in these midterms.
Why is it an existential challenge?
If you don't like the policies of Donald Trump, if you don't, not you nor if one doesn't like the policies of Donald Trump or the policies of this Congress, the way to stop those policies is by winning a Democratic U.S. House of Representatives. And here in Pennsylvania, we have 4 U.S. House seats that are going to be razor thin, probably come down to a point or so. If you're angry and frustrated by the lack of people standing up in Congress to stop what this president's doing, go flip the United States Senate in races across this country. I don't think we have the luxury of focusing on 2028 when we have these massive elections before us in 2026.
Great. Governor Shapiro, thank you.
Thank you.